pleasure to introduce to you Ms. Gissou. She is the new Executive Director of the Center. Ms. Gissou accepted her new post as the Executive Director of Iran Human Rights Documentation Center in November of 2011. Ms. Nia joined IHRDC from her posting on a trial team at the International Criminal Court, The Hague, the Netherlands. She started working with Iran Human Rights Documentation Center as a legal analyst in February of 2010 and led field investigation in Turkey and Europe. She conducted hundreds of witness interviews of survivors of human rights abuses perpetrated by the Islamic Republic of Iran. She produced comprehensive reports on human rights violations of the rights of women and ethnic and religious minorities in Iran, such as the executions of courts following the 1979 revolution. In summer of 2011, she left IHRDC to return to The Hague to work on Kenya post-election violence cases at the International Criminal Court. While in The Hague, prior to her rejoining the Iran Human Rights Documentation Center, she drafted a petition signed by nearly 200 international criminal practitioners requesting the International Criminal Court to open up an inquiry into post-June 2009 violation of human rights in Iran to obtain extensive documentation. Gissou also advised governmental and regional bodies, policymakers, and non-governmental organizations on the human rights situation and in Iran and the larger region. She has extensive experience in international criminal justice and a deep knowledge of human rights issues in Iran and the greater Middle East. Please help me to welcome Gissou.
Hi everyone. Forgive me, I don't have a super formal style of speaking, so if it's all right with you, I'm just going to hold the mic and walk around.
No.
No. What for this? No? Thank you so much for coming. I myself was 10 minutes late because of the train, and I was so worried, but there's a lot of snow, and I just so much appreciate that you've come out to see us speak, despite the hardship in getting here, I'm sure. So the reason that I wanted to come to Toronto and that I've been coming to different cities to speak about what IHRDC does is because a lot of times people ask me, what does it mean when you say that you're documenting, documentation? What does that mean? What are you doing exactly? How is this going to help what we're doing in Iran? I don't understand. There's a lot of confusion about, what this work can really accomplish. Is this the right place to invest resources and time, or should we be doing something different? So I thought the best thing is that I should just come to different cities, especially where there are large populations of Iranians in the diaspora, and speak about what we do and take your questions and see if there's interest, because I know a lot of us have the same mission, the same hope, and the same desires for human rights advancement in Iran, and that a lot of us work on that all the time. So I want to see how we can combine our efforts and answer any questions that you may have. So just to start this off, I want to hear from you first, actually. I want to know what documentation, مستند سازی, what that means to you. Any takers?
Truth.
Truth. Okay. It's good. It's a good answer. Anybody else?
Sabt. Sabt.
Yeah, recording. Sure, phone
Evidence,
recording.
testimony.
Getting testimony. Okay. The reason I asked that is because I'm gonna tell you a story. About, I think it was in winter 2011, I was on mission in Turkey and in Europe. We were interviewing people who had been in Sanandaj in April 1980, so in Iranian Kurdistan, in Sanandaj, and they had underwent something called the 24-day war, which probably a lot of you are familiar with. And there was one woman, she was, I think, maybe 65. She had been telling us how, you know, at that time, she 4 of her brothers had actually been killed in the battle. And she was talking about these horrible things that happened to her, how she was captured, and you know, she was sent to jail because she was suspected of having assisted komale. And she was telling us this story, and as she was telling us, you know, there were just tears coming down her cheeks, and we were all very moved by it. We were interviewing her for one of our reports that's up there, actually, for anybody who didn't get a copy. And when I asked her, you know, at the end of the interview, this was a 3-hour interview, me and my researcher were there interviewing her. At the end of the interview, she said, you know, I've never told anyone this whole story from start to finish. So forgive me because I'm crying, but I've never actually told this story. And we were shocked. We were shocked that she could have gone through something that was so painful and significant, but that she hadn't shared it with anyone. And we said, well, you know, have you kept a journal? This would be an incredible memoirs. You know, have you given any witness statement to anyone? And she said no. And she said because everybody else went through the same thing. So when we pointed out that what she had gone through, there was mass violations, you know, human rights violations. Far beyond that, it could be, you know, these are mass crimes. It's something even beyond just, you know, civil or political oppression. It's beyond that, torture and so on. She just thought it was something that happened to everybody around her. So, you know, what was so unique about her case? So why would she put it down into writing? And that was really, I think, a moment that was very significant for me, I think for everybody who was in the room and who we related the story to, that a lot of people who've been through these experiences don't even necessarily recognize it as a violation that would give rise to accountability and for somebody to actually be charged with these crimes. Because it was so part of their experience, because it was something that all their neighbors and their family went through, and it was just how life was. And that's something really important to remember, that there's lots of evidence out there, lots of evidence that we still haven't touched, that other groups who do this work still haven't uncovered. And it's because sometimes witnesses and survivors of these incidents don't think it's even something worth, you know, creating a statement out of or telling someone, because it's something that was just part of their life. So the reason that I share that is because I'm sure that many of you know people who've been through these things, who went through these things after the time of the revolution, who went through these things in the 80s, in the 90s, up to the present day, but who either haven't come forward because maybe they're reluctant to. There's a whole range of reasons. They could be a bit frightened of what the consequences would be if they come out publicly and say these things. It could be because some people have buried the memories because it's so traumatic, and that's completely understandable. But then there's others, I think, who would be willing to come forward and share what's happened to them, and they just need a little push. They need to know that it matters to give their testimony, that it's not just, you know, that they give their testimony and nothing happens with it. I mean, one question we get a lot is, okay, if I give you a statement, then, are you going to take it to the UN? Is there a court case that's going to come out of it? What's the point in me giving you this statement and reliving these traumatic things that have happened in my life? Like, what are you going to do for me? And the message here is that together, in the aggregate, all of these statements, all of this evidence, as unique as each case is, but in the aggregate, it forms a really powerful record of what government officials and other authorities who are responsible for arbitrary arrests, imprisonment, torture, and even execution, it really establishes their responsibility. And this is something that's very foundational and that we need to encourage on every level so that when the time comes for something formal to come out of this, hopefully, maybe a judicial proceeding, maybe a commission of inquiry, that we will have all the documentation there. Now, let me switch over to why I think this is important. And why, even though in this moment we do not have a formal court that could hear evidence of these crimes, that's set up specifically for Iran. I mean, we had the Iran Tribunal, as Kaveh had mentioned, and that was largely a symbolic court. It wasn't legally binding, but that was a good model for what could come in the future. But let me explain why I hope that we just at least collect the dossier and that we have the documentation for the next step. While I was in The Hague, I worked on many different cases, some regarding the former Yugoslavia, and some involving Rwanda, and some involving Kenya. And colleagues of mine, I did not personally work on this matter, but colleagues of mine worked on cases in West Africa, specifically Charles Taylor, the former president of Liberia. And I was astonished by what I saw in those cases, whereas in the cases that I was working on at the court for the former Yugoslavia, everything had been documented to a T. The defense ministers and the other people that were involved in what has been adjudicated to be crimes against humanity and the other mass crimes that took place in that time period, they had meticulously documented what, the influx of prisoners, what kind of food prisoners were given, who was taken out for forced labor. They had been very, it's almost like the Germans during World War II. They've been very precise about documenting it. So the matter of tendering this evidence was, I don't want to say it was a simple matter, far from it, but there was a lot of documents to look to establish the charges that were alleged in these trials. Contrast that with something like the Charles Taylor trial in West Africa and what happened in that conflict. And there was almost no paper trail. It wasn't the same kind of paper recording, the same documents that one could avail yourself of to show what would be human rights abuses and mass crimes. Instead, they had to rely almost solely, the prosecutor had to rely almost solely on oral testimony. So they just had to rely on witnesses coming forward and giving their account of what happened. And by that point, some of the witnesses had died. They had either died because they had been involved in subsequent battles and violence, and so they had maybe died an unnatural death in some cases. In other cases, there was very high rates of disease in Liberia and Sierra Leone, so some had died from disease. But the point was that a lot of that testimony was never taken. So I think the prosecutor had a much more difficult time of proving their case because that evidence had vanished, had disappeared. It was no longer for them to obtain years after the fact. What I think we should all aim towards is that that doesn't happen in this case, that doesn't happen in the case of Iran. I think there has been enormous efforts towards that. IHRDC is not the only group that works on documenting human rights abuses. There's others as well that we work with. And I think it all has to be a united effort. But I would stress that this is the importance for the work. You know, it's something that's long-term. It's not something that's just going to happen overnight. But I wanted to share this with you of why I think it's important. I hope you agree. And I wanted to hear your views about what, I know that the community in Toronto is extremely active. And I think the Iranian community in Canada as a whole, there's a lot, you know, it's really admirable that there is so much activity around these concepts. I think it's somewhere where, you know, Iranian communities in the US could learn a lesson. There's not, I wouldn't say there's quite as much activity as I've already observed vis-a-vis that's happening here in Canada. So I wanted to hear from you. I mean, we can take questions for maybe like 10 minutes until we switch it over to Hossein Raeissi. But I wanted to hear your views on this, and maybe, you know, you can even approach me afterwards, but how IHRDC can engage with the community here to really try to, A, gain access to, you know, witnesses and people that you know of who would have something to share with us, and also how to, B, tap into resources. I mean, that can be anything from, you know, financial support to just, you know, people, we have people all the time who email the center and want to give translation services. You know, they identify with the mission, they want to help. But if you know of people here in this community who are looking for a framework within which to sort of push the human rights agenda forward, then I would love to be in touch with them. I'll give you, I have 2 huge stacks of cards right there that I'm happy to pass out to everybody. But I want to hear from you for 10 minutes if anybody has any questions about what I've said right now before we turn it over.